Hello students, today we will do 5th chapter of our supplementary reader Footprints Without Feet. The name of the lesson is the same as is the name of your book. It means the name of the book is based on this chapter. So you can understand how important this chapter is. Footprints Without Feet, as the name indicates. Don't you think that it is impossible to have footprints without feet? Yes, it is impossible, but in the chapter it becomes possible. And how? Let's read before the chapter. Can a man become invisible? This is the story of a scientist who discovers how to make himself invisible. Does he use or misuse his discovery? It means there was a scientist who invented some drugs that could make the human body invisible, and he used those drugs himself and his body became invisible. Then, after becoming invisible, every aspect, everything has two aspects, one advantageous and the other one disadvantageous. The steps that he took after becoming invisible, were those steps advantageous to the society or disadvantageous? So, let's read the chapter. The two boys started in surprise at the first muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? And where was the man? It means two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. It means the two boys were there in the city, and they were surprised because they were looking that the muddy imprints were coming from nowhere, because they could see only the imprints of the feet and the man was not seen to them. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in the middle of London? This was the thing that the boys were thinking. And where was the man? Because the boys could see only the footprints that were coming from nowhere, and they were surprised. That first thing of their surprise was that what was the man doing on the steps of a house, and the second thing was that where was the man, because only the footprints were seen and not the man. As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmarks appeared from nowhere. So they were surprised. They were looking continuously, and what did they see? That fresh footmarks appeared from nowhere. It means, when does the footmarks appear? When one person steps on the floor. So footprints were coming, and fresh footprints were coming, but the man was not seen. Further footprints followed, one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter and at last disappeared altogether. It means the boys were looking that the muddy imprints were seen and they were fresh, they were just being made, but by whom? They did not know. They did not know who was making the muddy imprints, because the imprints were following, descending the steps of the house, and the boys were surprised, but they followed the impressions, and they saw that the impressions were becoming fainter and fainter. As you know, that suppose we put our feet in mud and we walk on, so the first imprint will be thicker, then lighter, then lighter, then lighter, and so on. So this way the muddy impressions were becoming fainter and fainter and at last disappeared altogether. So the explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make human body transparent. So what was there? That the boys were following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. The scientist had discovered the drugs that could make the human body transparent, and he himself swallowed those drugs and he became transparent. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. So, as I told you, the name of the scientist was Griffin. He was carrying out experiments for a long time and he wanted to prove that the human body could be invisible, could be transparent, and finally he became successful, and whatever drugs he invented, he ate himself and he became invisible. His body became transparent. Transparent means that the sheet that is through out of which we can see the things of the other side. So his body had become transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as a glass. It means the body had become invisible. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. Lawless means who doesn't follow the laws. So, although he was a brilliant scientist because he had discovered such a rare drug, but he was a lawless person. He did not abide by the laws. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to house. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus it was that he became a homeless wanderer without clothes, without money, and quite invisible until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. Now, it is told that he was he was an intelligent scientist, but he was a lawless person. What did he do that we can say that he was a lawless person? That he lived in a rented house and the landlord did not like him, so he wanted to eject him from his house. So, and Griffin wanted to take revenge. So, what did he do? He became invisible, he removed his clothes, and then he set fire to the house. In revenge, he set fire to the house of the landlord and then he had to run away. But how did the body become invisible? After eating drugs, he had to remove the clothes. Then only his body could become invisible. So he had to remove his clothes and then he became a homeless wanderer without clothes, without money, and quite invisible. So he was, but now this happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. By now he was not seen by anybody. Still he had run away, but when he stepped in the mud, then the footprints of his feet were seen there by the boys. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London. But his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter, the air was bitterly cold, and he could not do without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. So the two boys were following him and he escaped from them easily because they did not know who was the man because he was invisible, so they could not follow him anymore. And he ran away from there. But his adventures were not over because but it was a bad time of year for him because it was a chilling winter time, and due to winter he was feeling cold because he was without clothes whenever he was invisible. But you know that the body was only invisible, but its body still needed warmth. So the air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes, so he needed clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. So what did he decide? That he should enter some London store, some shop, so that he could get the clothes to cover his body so that he could escape himself from the chilling winter. Closing time arrived. arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. Soon, with shoes, an overcoat, and a wide brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up with the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. Now, what did he decide? That he will enter some London store. Store means a big shop where everything is sold. So, he entered the store, and it was the closing time of the store. The closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing because he had entered the store without clothes, becoming invisible so that no one could see him. So he entered the store, and it was the closing time. As the doors were shut and the owners and the servants of the store went out to their houses, then what did he do? He gave himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense, because there were clothes in the store, there were foods, every food items in the store. So what did he do? Without spending any money, he could get the clothes and he could get food. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. He got warm clothes there. He got warm clothes, and soon, with shoes, an overcoat, and a white brimmed hat, these were the things that he had worn. Then he became a fully dressed and visible person, because now he had clothes on his body, so he became visible. And then in the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, because he was hungry as well. So he went in the kitchen of the restaurant, and there he found cold meat was there and cold coffee was there. So he ate up both the things. Then sweets and wine he took from the grocery store, and he enjoyed the meal. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. There was a pile of quilts for selling. So what did he do? Because it was night time and he was tired, so he lay down on the pile of quilts. Then what happened? Because it was the night time, so next day, if only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When he saw a couple of them, what happened? Now he slept on the pile of quilts in the night, and he remained sleeping throughout the night. In the morning, he did not get up by the time the servants of the shop came there. So when he woke up, he saw that the assistants of the shop had come there, and they were coming towards him. Then what did he do? When he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. This was the obvious thing, that when he saw that the people were coming to chase him, then he started to run. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. Now, when he was about to be caught, then what did he do? He had to take off his clothes, his newly found clothes that he had just found a night before. Then he had to remove his clothes so that he could become invisible and could run away. So he had to remove his clothes once again, and it was still chill January air. Once again, he became invisible but naked. This time he decided to try the stroke of a theatrical company, in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above the shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. Now once again he was naked, but he was uncomfortable due to the winter, due to the cold. So he thought that he would enter some theatrical company, and there he will get some, not only the clothes but also the other things that could cover the whole of his body, even the face. So what did he do? He entered the Drury Lane. and Drury Lane is the place which is the center of the theatre world in London. So he entered there. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages round his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy white whiskers, and a large hat. To escape without being seen, he carelessly attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he could find. Now he entered the Drury Lane, and there in the Drury Lane he found a shop, and he entered there. He entered there invisible, so no one saw him because he was invisible, because he was without clothes. And after some time, when he came out, he had worn not only the clothes but also wearing bandages round his forehead. He had worn bandages round his forehead and false glasses and dark glasses, spectacles, or you can say sunglasses, then false nose also, and big bushy side whiskers. Whiskers, you know, hair, dadi muche, okay, and a large hat. So all these things he had worn. To escape without being seen, he carelessly attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he could find. Now he was with clothes and he was now visible, but still he wanted to run away without being seen. So what did he do? He attacked the shopkeeper from behind, and when the shopkeeper fell or was hurt, he robbed him of all the money that was with the shopkeeper and ran away. Eager to get away from crowded London, he took a train to the village of Iping, where he booked 2 rooms at the local inn. Now, he wanted to get away from London so that he could not be found, he could not be caught. So, there was a train going to Iping village, and he boarded the train and reached the village Iping, and there he booked 2 rooms in the local inn. Inn is just like a hotel but a cheap one, जिसको हम धर्मशाला भी कहते हैं. So he booked there his 2 rooms. The arrival of a stranger at an inn in winter was in any case a unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all tongues wagging. Mrs. Hall, the landlord's wife, made every effort to be friendly, but Griffin had no desire to talk and told her, "My reason for coming to Iping is a desire for solitude. I do not wish to be disturbed in my work. Besides, an accident has affected my face." Now he reached the Iping, as he had already booked his 2 rooms there. Now, this was a place where in winter no visitors used to come. So his arrival was an unusual event. And all the people were surprised because of his appearance. His appearance was so surprising because what did he wear? Along with the clothes, he used to wear bandages on forehead, false nose, dark glasses, and whiskers. So that is why his appearance was strange, and all the people were surprised. But the landlord's wife, Mrs. Hall, he made effort to be friendly with Griffin, the scientist, but he did not want to talk. So he told her that his reason of coming to Iping was to live in solitude. He wanted to live alone, and he also told that he did not want to be disturbed in his work. And he told that why did he wear the bandages or so. He said that an accident had affected his face. Satisfied that her guest was an eccentric scientist, and in view of the fact that he had paid her in advance, Mrs. Hall was prepared to excuse the strange habits and irritable temper. But the stolen money did not last long, and presently Griffin had to admit that he had no more ready cash. He pretended, however, that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. Now, how much money did he have? Only the money that he had stolen from the shopkeeper of the theatrical company. So whatever money he had, he gave it as advance for the rent of the room. But the stolen money did not last long, and Mrs. Hall was prepared to excuse him for his irritable temper because she had got the rent of the room in advance. But after some time, he had to admit that he had no ready cash to pay more rent. But still, he pretended that he was waiting money or some check was about to come to him. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode occurred. Very early in the morning, a clergyman and his wife were awakened by noises in the study. Creeping downstairs, they heard the chink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. Without making any noise and with a poker grasped firmly in a hand, the clergyman flung open the door. Surrender. What happened after some time, that in the same inn there used to live a clergyman along with his wife, and one morning the couple heard that the voices were there from the desk from their study room, that the someone was taking the money, the coins from their desk. So as they heard the money, what did they do? They went very silently in the room, and having a thick stick in his hand, and flung open the door and said surrender. It means they wanted to catch the person red handed who was taking money from their desk. Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. He and his wife looked under the desk and behind the curtains, and even up the chimney. There wasn't any sign of anybody, yet the desk had been opened and the housekeeping money was missing. As they opened the room, they were surprised that there was no one in the room. Room was empty. Both of them, he and his wife, looked everywhere in the room. They even looked under the desk, behind the curtains, and even up the chimney. It means they searched everywhere, but there was nobody. But they saw that the desk had been opened and the money was missing. It means it was true that the voices that they heard was true, and anybody has taken up the money. Extraordinary affair, the clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. The clergyman was very much surprised, and throughout the day he went on saying that it was an extraordinary affair. And what was the extraordinary affair? That there was no one in the room. Still, they heard that someone was taking money from the desk and money was missing, but no one was found in the room. But it was not as extraordinary as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture a little later that morning. Then one more episode happened, and what was it? It was that the extraordinary behavior of the Mrs. Hall's furniture. Do the furniture do some behavior? No, but this is the more extraordinary thing, that the furniture in Mrs. Hall room was behaving, and it was behaving very badly the same morning. The landlord and his wife were up very early and were surprised to see the scientist's door wide open. Usually, it was shut and locked, and he was furious if anyone entered his room. The opportunity seemed too good to be missed. They peeped round the door, saw nobody, and decided to investigate. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time, and stranger still, the clothes and bandages that he always wore were lying about on the bedroom. Now, the same morning, the landlord and his wife saw that the scientist's room was open. It means door was open. Usually it was shut, and he became angry if anybody tried to enter his room. But they saw that the room was open, and they got it a very good chance. So they decided to investigate. They entered the room. First they peeped, and they saw that there was nobody. So they entered the room. When they entered his room, they saw that the bedclothes were cold. It was early morning time, and when the bedclothes were cold, it shows that he had woken up a long time before. And they were surprised to see that the clothes and the bandages that he always used to wear were there lying on the room. It means he had gone out without clothes so that he could become invisible. All of a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear. A moment later, the hat on the bed post leapt up and dashed itself into her face. Then the bedroom chair became alive. Springing into the air, it charged straight at her legs foremost. As she and her husband turned away in terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. This was the behavior of the furniture. But what happened? When they were searching his room, then the hat that was lying on the bed top, first before that Mrs. Hall heard a sniff that just like someone was saying something very slowly in close to her ear, and just after a moment the hat that was lying on the bed, it leapt up, it sprang up and dashed on Mrs. Hall's face. Then what happened? The chair became alive. The chair sprang up, jumped up in the air, and it charged straight at her legs foremost. It means it hit her legs. As she and her husband turned away in terror, they got terrified. They thought they could not understand what was going on, so they got terrified and they turned back to come out of the room. The extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. It means the chair pushed them out and slammed the door and locked the door after them. Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stairs in hysterics. She was convinced that the room was haunted by spirits and that the stranger had somehow caused these to enter into her furniture. Mrs. Hall, who was about to fall in the stairs, he was about to get unconscious, and she was convinced that there were spirits or ghosts in the room, and that stranger means the scientist had caused the spirits to enter his furniture and his room. My poor mother used to sit in this chair. She moaned to think it should rise up against me now. She was surprised that and saying that this is the old chair of my mother, and my mother used to sit on this chair, and this is her memory. But I cannot imagine that this chair will rise against me someday. The feeling among the neighbors was that the trouble was caused by witchcraft. But witchcraft or not, when news of burglary at the clergyman's home became known, the stranger scientist was strongly suspected of having a hand in it. Suspicion grew even stronger when he suddenly produced some ready cash, though he had admitted not long before that he had no money. After all this episode, the news spread in the neighborhood. All thought that someone had done witchcraft, some magic in the room and the furniture, and all suspected that the stranger, the scientist, was behind all these things. And by now he was only suspected, but after some time he brought money to give the rent for the room, and when he brought money to give the rent for the room, then it was confirmed that only he had done all these things, because only some time before he had said that he had no money. The village constable was secretly sent for. Instead of waiting for the constable, Mrs. Hall went to the scientist, who had somehow mysteriously appeared from the empty bedroom. Now they called the village constable. Policeman was called. But before he came, Mrs. Hall went to the scientist, and who had somehow mysteriously appeared from his empty bedroom. By now, Mr. and Mrs. Hall had went into the room, and there was the behavior of the chair. It means the chair pushed them out and the room was empty. But after some time, they saw that the scientist was coming out from the empty bedroom. It means that he was visible that time and he had entered the room, and only he had used the chair to push them out. I want to know what you have been doing to my chair upstairs, she demanded, and I want to know how it is you come out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room. Yes, now Mrs. Hall asked him first, straightforward, she said that I want to know what were you doing to my furniture in the morning. And then she asked that how you appeared from an empty room. The room was empty when we entered there, and now you are coming out of it, and the door was locked. And how you entered the room, I want to investigate all these things. The scientist was always quick tempered, and now he became furious. You don't understand or who or what I am. He shouted. Very well, I'll show you. The scientist, when asked these questions, he became very angry and said that I will tell you who I am and what I am. Suddenly he threw off bandages, whiskers, spectacles, and even nose. It took him only a minute to do. The horrified people in the bar found themselves staring at a headless man. Now, when he said that I will show you who I am, he started taking off his bandages, whiskers, spectacles, clothes, and all these things. And when he removed all the things from the face, he became a headless man because his face had become invisible. Mr. Jeffers, the constable, now arrived and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without a head. But Jeffers was not easily prevented from doing his duty. If a magistrate's warrant ordered a person's arrest, then that person had to be arrested with or without his head. Mr. Jeffers is the name of the policeman because he was being called, so he had come, and he was surprised to find that he was to arrest a man without head, but he did not want to leave his duties, so he was determined to arrest him. There followed a remarkable scene as the policeman tried to get hold of a man who was becoming more and more invisible as he threw off one garment after another. Finally, a shirt flew into the air, and the constable found himself struggling with someone he could not see at all. It means the person, the scientist, was taking off his clothes one by one, and he was getting more and more invisible. Some people tried to help him but found themselves hit by blows that seemed to come from nowhere. When he took off his last shirt, then he became totally invisible. But the policeman was still struggling to get hold of him, and if the people helped him, he beat the people, but no one knew from where the blows were coming. In the end, Jeffers was knocked unconscious as he made a last attempt to hold on to the unseen scientist. There were nervous, excited cries of hold him, but this was easier said than done. Griffin had shaken himself free, and no one knew where to lay hands on him. Now he hit him, and Mr. Jeffers became unconscious. And there were only cries, hold him, hold him. Everybody was saying, hold him. But it was easy to say than to do. It means because he was an invisible man, so no one could catch him. So this is the story of the footprints without feet. I hope you liked the story and you enjoyed it. Still, if you feel any difficulty, you can call me for your doubts. Okay? Thank you.